Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. In today's episode, I'm going to be covering part 9 of the electric violin build. And specifically what I'm going to cover is the application of the finish. So without further ado, let's jump in and get started. The finishing product that I'm going to apply to my electric violin project is Sutherland Wells Wiping Varnish. This is a high luster, 100% pure polymerized tongue oil. And of course, before I could apply it, I had to make sure that the surface was prepped to perfection. And that was actually covered in part 8 if you'd like to go back and watch that to see what I did. But in a nutshell, I sanded all the surfaces from P150 grit all the way up to P400 grit. And to apply the finish, I'm using Scott Paint and Stain cloths. These are a lint-free cloth that works really great for applying the stain across the surface of the wood. I always try to fold the cloth so that the edges are on the inside of the pad that I make, and that way I reduce the potential for lint even more. Of course, common sense will dictate that you need to clean the surface of the wood before you apply the finish. That means you need to wipe it down with a tack rag or blow it off with a compressor, vacuum it off with a shop vac. I even like to wipe it down thoroughly with a cloth that's been dampened with mineral spirits just to get every little bit of dust off the surface. Then applying the finish is as easy as simply wiping on with a cloth and letting it soak into the wood. Now this product, like so many other finishing products, does have an odor. However, I don't consider it to be all that offensive. But you would probably want to wear a mask and work in a well-ventilated area. And also remember, it is an oil, so it is flammable. There are a number of reasons why I like to use this product as opposed to other oil finishes. It's very versatile, it's easy to apply, and it just looks fantastic. As far as its versatility, depending on how you apply the product is going to determine the amount of luster and the degree of sheen that the product will achieve for the instrument that you're applying it to. And in this case, what my goal is, I want to have a rich, warm luster, and I want a matte to satin sheen. So to achieve that, what I'll do is I'll apply a coat, let it soak in, and then I'll let it dry for about 8 to 12 hours. And that's another reason why I really like this product. Because it's polymerized, it's going to dry much, much faster. If this were, say, a pure tongue oil, it could take weeks, if not months, to fully dry before I could apply another coat. But with this product, because it is polymerized, it's going to dry much faster. So I can apply a coat, and then, like I said, 8 to 12 hours later, I can apply the next coat. However, before I apply the second coat, what I'll do is I will lightly sand the entire surface with a P400 grit sandpaper to remove any rag marks or dust nibs that may be present from applying that first coat. Then I'm going to let that second coat dry for 8 to 12 hours, and then I'll sand the surface again, but this time I'll move up to a P600 grit, and then I'll apply the next coat and let that dry and soak in. And once that's done, I could then just lightly sand the surface with a P600, or I could rub the surface with a synthetic Scotch-Brite pad to get it really smooth and to achieve that level of sheen that I want. And then once I've applied each coat while it's still wet, I'll hang it up from a hook in the ceiling and give it a chance to dry for that 8 to 12 hours. Before I continue with this video, I want to encourage you to click that thumbs up button down below. And if you're new to the channel, I hope that by the end of the video, I'll have earned your subscription. And remember, making these videos takes time and effort means money. So if you would like to help support the channel financially, you can visit my eGuitar Plans web store. There's a link in the description below, or you can visit the Highline Guitars merch store, which is displayed below the description for this video. And there you can make purchases which will help support this channel financially, but you'll also be getting something in return. Oh, and if you want to keep it simple, you can always just click that thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount that you would like or that you feel is fair. Now let's get back to the video. All right, so I'm back here in the shop. It's the next day and the polymerized tongue oil has pretty much fully dried. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sand the surface with some P400 grit sandpaper in preparation for applying the second coat. But one of the things that I really like about using any type of oil finish is that it can help reveal flaws in the surface that you may not have noticed during that initial sanding phase. And it's really true with maple, because maple is such a hard wood that sometimes, despite your best efforts, there may still be some tool marks left in the wood, and when you apply the oil, those tool marks are suddenly revealed. And I have a few tool marks here on the back of this headstock that I just don't like. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my 150 grit. I'll sand out those tool marks. Then in just this area, I will sand with 220, 320, and then 400 grit. And then, of course, the rest of the neck will be sanded with 400 grit along with the body. Once that is done, I'll clean everything off, and then I'm going to apply a second coat of the polymerized tongue oil. I'll let that dry overnight, and then tomorrow I'm going to sand the surface with a 600 grit. So I'm going to progress to finer grits. Once I've sanded with the 600 grit, I'll apply another coat of the polymerized tongue oil. That'll be the third coat. I'll let that dry overnight. And then I will probably sand with an 800 grit the next day and apply a fourth coat. And after that, I will probably be finished with applying the oil. Now, the thing about the polymerized tongue oils is, depending on how you apply it, you can achieve different levels of sheen. And they also sell a matte sheen, a gloss sheen, so you can use those specific products to achieve the level of sheen you want. But to achieve those different levels of sheen depends on how you apply it. If I was going for a high gloss shine with this instrument, what I would have done to begin with is applied a sanding sealer, and I would have wet sanded that in using a 400 grit wet dry sandpaper. Because when you sand using that wet dry sandpaper, while the oil is still wet, it will generate sanding dust that mixes in with the sanding sealer oil and packs down into the grain and pores. So then the next day, once it's dried, you have filled the grain. In this case, I wasn't really too concerned with filling the grain. In fact, I really like the look sometimes of the grain and pore texture. So I chose not to use the sealer to fill it. So I'm just going to use the polymerized tongue oil top coat finish to enhance the beauty of the wood and to offer some protection. So I'm just going to continue with applying and sanding and applying and sanding until I've achieved about 4 coats. And by then I should have a surface that is exactly what I'm looking for in this particular instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with lightly sanding the entire surface with the 400 grit. Then I will wipe it off with a tack rag and apply the next coat. Now I want to emphasize that when I say lightly sanding, I mean lightly sanding. All you really want to do is reduce any rag marks or dust nibs that may still be present. You don't want to sand your previous coat completely off of the wood. That would defeat the purpose, and then your second coat would actually be like the first coat. Well, sanding in some of the hard to reach areas or on surfaces that have a lot of contour to them is where a lot of folks get themselves into trouble, and they tend to overdo it in an effort to achieve a perfect surface. But it really doesn't take that much work when you're doing this sort of sanding. Like I said, you're just using a light touch here. So don't obsess over trying to get a perfect surface and sand and sand and sand until you've removed all your finish. Just go lightly over the surface and you should be good to go. That's one of the beauties of using an oil finish. You're not going to see any of the potential issues that you may think are there. Instead, it's all going to blend together and look just fine as long as you just give it a light scuff. Now, earlier I mentioned I have to do some additional sanding repair work by dropping back to a 150 grit, and that's what's happening here. There were some tool marks on the back of this volute as well as the underside of the headstock, and I really wanted to remove those to make sure that the wood looks as perfectly smooth as possible. And so I started with the 150 and then I moved up to P220, P320, and then I finished with P400. And again, this is another reason why I like to use the polymerized tung oil. When I apply the second coat, it's going to blend in perfectly with the first coat, and you'll never know that I had to do this sanding touch-up work. Applying each additional coat is basically the same as applying the first coat. First I have to make sure that the surface is absolutely clean and dust-free before I can apply the oil. But then I'm just going to wipe it on the same way I did with that first coat. Okay, now let's not forget about the proper disposal of your oil-soaked rags and gloves. What I like to do is either lay them out on the concrete floor or over the side of a trash can like you see here. And you just need to make sure that the rags and the gloves and everything aren't bunched up together or touching one another. Otherwise, the exothermic heat they generate could cause them to catch fire. But once the oil has dried, I'll place them inside of a container filled with water, and that's how I'll dispose of them later on. All right, guys, well, that's all the time I have for this episode. And I know you want to see what the Violin looks like with the finish applied to it. However, I'm going to wait and show you that after the next episode, which will be part 10. And the reason for that is because in part 10, I'm going to be installing the neck into the body. And I have a feeling that once the neck is installed in the body, I may have to do a little bit of finish retouching. So we'll see. At any rate, I want to wait until then to show you how the Violin looks with this oil finish applied to it. So until the next episode, part 10, take care, stay safe, click the thumbs up button, visit eguitarplans.com, visit Highline Guitars YouTube merch store, or just click that thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount that you think is fair. At any rate, I hope to see you back for episode 10.